Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching The World Report. Let's first take a look at some headlines. President Donald Trump declares immediate readiness to meet Vladimir Putin. Russia says it's prepared for peaceful negotiations. Trump suggests ending the war if OPEC lowers their oil prices. A US judge has halted President Trump's bid to end birthright citizenship. The directive, issued on Trump's first day, would deny citizenship to children born on US soil unless a parent is a citizen or permanent resident. The second stage of the Israel-Hamas hostage exchange is set to take place on Saturday. In Lebanon, Hezbollah insists Israeli forces leave the country on schedule to keep their ceasefire deal on track. And the 2025 Oscar contenders are announced, with musical Emile Perez leading the pack at a record-breaking 13 nominations. The brutalist and popular musical Wicked also gets 10 nods each. US President Donald Trump has softened his stance on China, moving away from his earlier threats of 60% tariffs and instead expressing confidence in a trade deal. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, he highlighted the potential for a very good relationship with President Xi Jinping and is considering a visit to Beijing. His administration is weighing a 10% tariff, far lower than his campaign rhetoric. Beijing has responded warmly, with state media emphasising partnership and cooperation. However, key issues like Taiwan and trade fairness remain. Joining us firstly, we have Andrew K.P. Leung, who is an international and independent China strategist in Hong Kong. Andrew, thank you again for joining us. We've seen somewhat of a flip-flopping between Donald Trump and China. He said in one hand that he's going to impose these tariffs. He now seems to be softening his stance. Do you think the government in China are taking anything Trump is saying seriously?
I think that the trajectory of the relationship has got to be put into some sort of context. Let's go back a little to the time of President Obama. At that time, China was already being perceived as a threat to American dominance, hence the pivot to Asia. But later on, China's growth has been rapid and is seen not only eating Americans' lunch on high technology and a lot of other fields, but its geopolitical clout has increasing by leaps and bounds. And so by the time of Trump 1.0, China is being regarded by across the aisle as the United States' existential threat. And of course, during Trump 1.0 is focusing on trade. But Trump 1.20 has a much grander design, not just China. He wants to make America great again. And in his inaugural, he repeated his grand design on territorial ambitions, for example, in Canada, in Panama, in Greenland, or in Mexico. Obviously, he has a much grander design. Now, as far as the trade is concerned, I think it's come to the realization, and there is no point in just decoupling from China, as it were, because that's not going to bring United States any substantial benefit. So it's focusing on bringing jobs back to the United States and also increasing Americans' export to China, for example. And both are negotiable because now let's look at, first of all, the kind of export. What can China buy from the United States that the United States sort of produces, and China doesn't. So the main thing boils down to aircraft, energy, agricultural products like soybeans. So all these can be negotiated. Of course, the buying oil or gas from the United States could be more expensive, but on the other hand, the United States has become the world's largest energy exporter. And as for soybeans, of course, China is very short in agricultural products. It is the world's net importer of foodstuffs from the United States, from Latin America, and so on. So I think that, again, pivoting a little bit more to the United States is also negotiable.
Yes.
As for other areas like bringing jobs back to the United States, well, China is now transitioning from make in China when China producing stuff according to the so-called OEM to created in China when the products were created but made by China. But now it's gradually transitioning to owned by China. A lot of the operations in Southeast Asia, in other countries, they are production on the ground, producing jobs. And now with the elevation of Elon Musk to Donald Trump's inner circles, I think that the possibility exists to bring some of the operations on electric cars to invest in the United States. So I think that all these are negotiable, but then the change in Trump 2.0 to 2.0 is that the Trump probably has a grander design. That's why he wants to visit China within 100 days, and that's why he spoke to President Xi, the only world leader he spoke to before his inaugural.
Yes.
And that points to a paradigm shift in the kind of relationship. He's not going to embrace China entirely. Of course, he's going to want to, because there's a bipartisan consensus that China is an existential threat to American dominance. And of course, American great again doesn't mean conceding necessarily a space to China. But I think he wants a deal for a much grander design compared with the previous administration.
Yes, Andrew, and thank you for that. We're looking, of course, there about areas in which the two countries can combine, but there are, of course, areas, as we've mentioned, where they are deeply divided. One of those is Taiwan. Scott Faulkner, how important do you think American support for Taiwan could be in this new relationship forming between Trump and Xi?
I think that the United States is going to continue to be assertive about freedom of the seas, freedom of transit through the South China Sea. There's also a number of armaments that Taiwan actually paid for and was held up under the Biden administration. I think those armaments will be ultimately delivered. So I think that one of the biggest shifts, and we're seeing this throughout the world with Trump, is that China and a lot of Trump's and basically America's adversaries play the old ancient game of Go, where you're basically trying to control the board in different ways, sometimes with moves that don't look commonsensical initially, but ultimately pay out. I think America, for many years under both administrations, played whack-a-mole. We were very defensive, but we depended on our military might. Trump wants to enter Go. He wants to himself look at how America can control the board politically and economically. And some of those initial moves may not seem like making any sense because they're no longer linear. They're part of looking at the entire world in a holistic way. So it's going to be a very interesting time for the world, as Trump basically outlined at his Davos remarks yesterday.
Thank you, Scott Faulkner. Also joining us, Ambassador Suresh Goel, a former diplomat. Thank you, Ambassador Goel. Looking at Trump's comments on China, I still want to dig deeper into the sort of contradiction that there seems to be within recent days. Trump's been very bombastic in his sort of comments relating to the Panama Canal, saying that it's owned and controlled by China, and he obviously wants to take that back. So is there a line between Trump's sort of remarks that we hear today versus previous remarks? Do you think the reality is somewhere in the middle? Do you think he's maybe
I'm
sort
sorry,
of saying
George,
what he needs
I lost
to?
you for a... could you please repeat?
Yes, Ambassador Goel. I want to look at the sort of comments Trump has made, but also hark back to previous comments. He spoke about the Panama Canal and China owning it. But do you think the reality of where Trump sits on his China foreign policy is somewhere between the two comments? And what do you think the reality of the situation for Trump and his ambitions for China may be?
Josh, it's a very complex situation, if I could. I don't think that anybody would know the reality till it actually happens. Let me explain why. The reality is that for Trump, China is not part of the foreign policy agenda anymore. For Trump, China is not part of the domestic agenda, which is very, very important to him, whether it is Panama Canal, because that is immediately on the border of USA. It is controlling the trade access for the USA to the Pacific, and therefore all that he does is, when he's thinking, is that China controlling his entry point, exit point to the Pacific. Mexico, China is there in the large numbers, sending automobiles, sending all kinds of products from Mexico, and to an extent, even not controlling really, but basically influencing the people. And therefore, for the USA, China is not just basically a Pacific country anymore, or South China Seas or Indo-Pacific country anymore. China is a country which is right there at the doorstep. And therefore, the trade and everything that he talks about are guided by his own domestic agenda, number one. Number two, in the case of China, and I think he must have been briefed very well by the people in his own country, where Xi Jinping himself is not secure of his own political fortunes in the country. When I say political fortunes, I don't mean being elected, etc., or not, but the opposition back at home from the different quarters. And there are reports about opposition from the military, even the military. Well, Xi Jinping is facing the kind of situation that he faces, and therefore he has to demonstrate his superiority, his strength, being a strong leader in the area. Things become even more difficult. So what we are now really witnessing is, to my mind, Trump trying to basically demonstrate that he remains, or USA remains, numero uno, and Xi Jinping demonstrating that he is vulnerable. And in that kind of a situation, Josh, nothing can be really proven till it happens on the ground. And the way he's changing the situation, Trump, and the way Xi Jinping demonstrates that he's prepared to listen to Trump, I think we need to wait for chips to fall in place,
yes,
as the American slang is.
Yes, thank you very much to Andrew KP Leung. We will be joined by Ambassador Goel and Scott Faulkner as we discuss our next story, and we stay with President Trump, who signed an executive order on ending birthright citizenship effective on February the 20th. The order prevents children of foreign passport holders, including legal visitors, from automatically becoming US citizens. Trump criticised birthright citizenship as ridiculous, claiming the US is the only country with such a policy. The move targets children born to both unauthorised immigrants and those on temporary visas. Legal challenges are already underway, with civil rights groups, including the ACLU, filing a lawsuit. A federal judge in Seattle has since temporarily blocked the order, calling it blatantly unconstitutional. Meanwhile, 36 Republican lawmakers are pursuing legislation to codify the policy. Ambassador Goel, I will come back to you on this one. There seems to be a clear sort of agenda and message from Donald Trump, but judges are putting their foot down. This is arguably the first defeat for Trump in one of his policy agendas, specifically relating as well to immigration. What do you think this means for Trump in terms of his plans of deportation, and how do you think this delay could impact that being enacted sooner?
I'm not quite sure how the legal process works in the USA on this matter, because the judge has declared that the executive decision is in violation of the constitutional process, of the constitutional law, And therefore, if the law stands cancelled for the time being till Trump can prove it, enact it again, then of course he will have to continue to contest the whole process for I don't know how long, maybe till he gets re-elected. And since he can't get re-elected, maybe 4 years at least. But if, and I'm not sure about the legal processes here, if Trump can actually annul or can go against the orders from the court and say that his decision stays in the place till it is actually annulled, situation is very different. I know for fact that Trump is very, very keen to ensure that his executive decision stays. Rest, really, I don't know at all. We will have to wait and see. But it is actually quite a bit of a shock to his decision. The fact is that the question being contested is that according to Trump's executive decision, the illegal immigrants, they do not actually face the US jurisdiction. And because the constitutional amendment says that those who are actually subject to the US jurisdiction, their children can become the citizens. But at the same time, even the illegal immigrants who are in the USA, they're subject to the US jurisdiction. So I think, as I said, the jury is out. We again need to wait.
Yes, Scott Faulkner. Unconstitutional is the word from the judge in this case. Multiple states have spoken out, multiple groups, multiple individuals have spoken out. Does this show that potentially Trump's policies on immigration aren't as widely popular as it seemed, given his sort of lead in the popular vote in the election, but also in enacting some of these immigration policies as he's promised to do so?
Trump is moving against illegal immigration on a wide front. The worst out first. You know, you already have we have our immigration control agency already arresting hundreds and hundreds of drug dealers, murderers, rapists who are going to be deported from the United States. So those aspects, those actions are very popular in the United States. Where Trump is going with the birthright citizenship is trying to clarify an amendment, the 14th Amendment to our Constitution, which was one of 3 amendments passed after our Civil War to fully enfranchise former slaves. And so the whole wording of subject to, are they subject to because they're already subjects, or is it subject to because they are in the United States under American law? Well, so are ambassadors, so are tourists. So it's a very poorly worded section. We have to go back into the minds of the Congress and the states that ratified it back in the 1870s to figure out what, in 1860s, to figure out what it really means. So it's actually a very good court case to clarify a bone of contention within our U.S. Constitution. So it does not affect the wider range of actions that Trump is taking to remove, especially initially, the criminal aliens in the United States.
Scott Faulkner, very quickly, we are almost out of time. I just want a very quick answer. Do you think that Trump will get his wish and birth citizenship will be ended? And do you think we could see a lot of children being deported from America?
I think we're 1 or 2 years away with the Supreme Court decision. And if the Supreme Court upholds Trump, then we could see that.
Scott Faulkner, Ambassador Goel, thank you both very much for joining us. We move on to a story also pertaining the new president, US President Donald Trump, who has called for Russian President Vladimir Putin to meet him immediately, to which Moscow has replied positively. Also, Trump has roped in other actors playing a role in fueling the crisis and asked them for changes. Here's the report.
Should end immediately. Should have never started. That would never have started if I were... I used to talk to Putin about it.
The Russia-Ukraine war fate was believed to be in the hands of the new US administration. And now that Donald Trump has taken the Oval Office, his goals seem to be taking effect. Trump has now expressed his plans to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin to secure an end to the war with Ukraine.
And I think they have a lot of power over Russia, so I think Russia should want to make a deal. Maybe they want to make a deal. I think from what I hear, Putin would like to see me, and we'll meet as soon as we can. I'd meet immediately.
Speaking from the Oval Office, Trump also mentioned Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's readiness for the truce.
Yeah, sure. He's ready to negotiate a deal. He'd like to stop. He's somebody that lost a lot of soldiers.
In response, the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said that Moscow was ready for mutually respectful dialogue with Trump. This came a day after Trump imposed fresh sanctions on Moscow if Russia did not strike a deal to end the war with Ukraine. Not just this, Trump has also accused the Saudis and OPEC of fueling the war through high oil prices. He added that the war would end immediately if the price came down. The Saudis and Russia coordinate to influence global prices through the group OPEC. As a result, soon after Trump's speech, oil prices fell 1%. Expectations are high that Russian President Vladimir Putin and Trump will soon hold a phone call to discuss the conflict. With that awaits the future of the conflict in Ukraine. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's now head to South America for more updates in that region. Argentina's economy grew for the first time in half a year. This posted a modest 0.1 year-on-year expansion in November that beat expectations. The construction and commodity sectors posted the largest declines. The data points to a possible turnaround for Argentina's battered economy. It was hit hard by Libertarian President Javier Milei's tough austerity measures aimed at lowering inflation and stabilizing. Cash-starved Cuba this month opened the first grocery store to accept hard US currency on the island in nearly 2 decades. This is the latest sign of a trend towards dollarization in the communist-run country. The store, opened just a few weeks, garners praise from the lucky few with dollars. On the island, banks stopped accepting cash deposits in greenbacks just 4 years ago. Cubans with access to dollars can also purchase gasoline without waiting in long lines. Thousands of people took to the streets on Thursday to protest the killing of 2 children in an attempted carjacking. The incident occurred in Mexico's troubled northwestern state of Sinaloa. Among the demonstrators were mothers and children in school uniform, all demanding an end to the cartel violence that has ravaged the region. Brazil, the host of this year's COP30 Global Climate Summit, sees an opportunity to amplify the voice of developing nations. This comes in what will be a fierce dispute over who will pay for the global transition to cleaner energy sources. André Correa de Largo, the newly appointed president of COP30, noted that under President Joe Biden, the US implemented new policies to fight climate change. He also mentioned about Biden's work to strengthen the role of multilateral development banks. This comes as US President Donald Trump withdrew the country from the Paris Agreement. That is all we have time for, but we'll be back shortly with more of your latest international news updates.